how do I take all this wisdom that I learn, not only from books, but from interacting with human beings, and try and effect leaders? Because part of what we try and do is to develop effective leaders. And an effective leader is one that has personal integrity and technical competence. So you need both. A lot of my mentors in life have created Busara leadership partners without them even knowing, because they've ignited this passion for knowledge, for wisdom, for being credible in the context of gaining experience. Don't just assume that, especially in South Africa, when we are going through this period, which maybe in 20 years' time is not going to be there anymore, of Black economic transformation. I need Dudu Msomi to be known for being an expert in strategy, in leadership. And it must be something so well-deserved and well-earned with a tangible track record. And those mentors have created this kind of person. I'm very passionate about that. As an African female, to make an impact in the corporate space as a corporate strategist. It's not an area that we're well known for, but I'm hoping that I will leave my mark there. Interestingly enough, my goal was to be a psychologist until I listened to a program on 5FM as a student. I was doing third year, and they were talking about what causes people to be unhappy. And interestingly enough, it was a clinical psychologist talking about where our reality and our desires don't meet. This is where you start getting dissatisfaction. And the interesting part, to use an example of a psychologist as an example, if you're a psychologist, you have this particular income that you're going to get. So you then can't have dreams of traveling the world, of having, a particular lifestyle, because you're going to be very unhappy. So you need to tailor-make your dreams in a way that is realistic so that you can achieve the life. And it was like somebody talking to me. And I love psychology. But I then realized that human behavior and human minds are in everything. And I was introduced to the advertising industry, which interestingly enough, my mother found fascinating, because even as a child, I used to sit in front of the television and repeat the ads, and she just thought this is very strange. So when I joined advertising and my career was at Saatchi & Saatchi, an amazing man interviewed me, William Leach, who had, I think his jeans were torn, and a white top, and that was the managing director. And he interviewed me, and our interview was supposed to be 1 hour. It ended up being 2 hours. And he was looking for somebody to work on the Pepsi account. And I had very strong views in terms of the strategy that Pepsi was executing. It was very American accents. And I felt in the new South Africa, it's a disservice to us. We are a proud nation. We become a new nation, and we should reflect advertising that reflects that. And he was fascinated that before I even give you a job, you are giving me input in terms of how this can be changed. And he said, well, since you have such strong views about it, why don't you join? The best decision I ever made. He was one of the best mentors that I've ever had. And I got to work in areas that no account executive in any other agency was working with the shareholders. And part of that honor was because of Mr. Tsomodise, who was one of the shareholders at Saatchi & Saatchi, where they gave me a seat at the table and allowed me to give input. where even when they were developing the Black economic, it was even before Black economic empowerment, but they were looking at convincing Saatchi & Saatchi to sell shares to the Black consortium. They allowed me to be at the table to help, develop the case study. So as a 24-year-old, already interacting at that level, it was just amazing. And that's how my career started. And I think also that's where I became very interested in corporate governance, because the very next year I started studying corporate governance. At that time, there was still King 1, going into King 2. And I realized something, that I love business. Selling product is fine. But what was more interesting to me was what was the impact on the bottom line. And so even looking at the creative product, I was always looking at it in the context of, this is the brief you were given, what strategy did you give, and is it really going to achieve what was intended? And I realized that advertising in that context was limited for me. And also, I felt we were at the end of the chain. Corporate strategy is not decided in an advertising agency. There are other things that impact services or products, which us in the advertising industry or agency have no control over. So you have no control over, what the employees are doing of that brand, what the processes are like, what the systems are like. And one of the best teachers in that was working on the Pepsi account, because we didn't sit in the offices. We spent a lot of time in the market. So we spent a lot of time going to spaza shops, going to the market, finding out what they enjoy. So you literally understood a product from bottling right up to the consumer. And we were very privileged, because even the bottler, New Age Beverages at that time, gave us access that I don't think was normal. Our client at that time, Alan Hanking, also gave us access that was not normal. So you'd really got to understand business in a different way. And I realized that the hobby of thinking and scenario planning that I've always had was leading me somewhere. And I remember somebody asking me, so what are you going to be in 5 years' time? And that was like a year into working. I was like, my goal in the future is to have somebody pay me for my brain and how I use it. And so that's what I think expertise is. And so I work very hard on this brain and the mind, how it thinks in terms of information, in terms of exposure, not just from books, but from real experiences. So everything I've done since I joined advertising was try to learn different disciplines. What makes a business? So I went into HR. If I had other choices, I would have gone into finance. But my financial exposure actually came when I went into the financial sector. So I actually was deputy CEO at LOA, which was an interesting perspective. And I then joined an ICT consulting company, because I also wanted to understand processes and systems and ICT in a different way. So really my journey has really to understand what makes the business work and the leaders that make things happen. Especially when we always say the fish rots from the head. We can have amazing organizations, but if we do not get the right type of leaders, they have no chance. So all these ingredients, ever since I started my career till now, were really just to help me become, hopefully, what I think is the most sought after strategic advisor. I hope. So I actually did not think I will start a company on my own. I always thought I will do it in partnership. So I actually joined a ICT consulting firm called Ascentus. An amazing CEO, Riccardo Giletti, allowed me to be part of them. And the idea was that maybe over time, because he's a serial entrepreneur, over time I will take over. But I needed to obviously learn the business, which was quite interesting. But we had this conversation in November 2008, where he thought, Dudu, you are very passionate about certain things. You're very passionate about leadership and strategy. And sometimes to take an organization that is focused on something else and turn it around takes longer. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to start something. This was November, and in January, Busala Leadership Partners was formed. So there is no capital. There is no business plan. Because the business plan that was originally developed during my MBA was about women on boards. And I thought that was very restricting. So January 2009, when Busara Leadership Partners started, it was really driven by passion. I've always understood from the research that we had been doing that there is a leadership deficiency, especially strategic thinking, execution, and governance, because usually corporate governance is seen as a compliance issue. It's not integrated within strategy. So I knew there was that opportunity. So that's how. So it's no grand plan. It was really just passion. So the model that I had to follow, because I didn't have capital and I didn't have standing clients, because it's not like I had a reputation within strategy and leadership, was I had to bootstrap. So you have to use a bit of your credit card and you have to get a project and use, whatever revenue. But it wasn't easy even at the beginning, But I was happy because 2009, we had a recession in South Africa. So I saw it as a blessing because the quantity of work wasn't there, but you were getting 2, 3, or 4 projects a year. However, it was helping you fine-tune your own systems. So you really saw where your weaknesses were in terms of your processes and systems, and you were getting burnt along the way. And so that helped, because part of the shortcomings a lot of small businesses have is that we're very weak at systems, we're very weak at processes, and that also we don't really have a strong value proposition. Especially when you have lots of business coming your way, you sometimes get lulled into believing you have an amazing business. So really having limited business at the beginning really helped refine. In fact, what we do now as Busara Leadership Partners is not quite what we started doing in 2009, because through interacting with clients, doing the work, we had to refine and really find a sweet spot. And so now we're really comfortable in terms of we know what we need to do, and I think we do it well in terms of developing leaders and helping them to be effective. I must say the fascinating thing is sometimes when a client comes to you, they usually assume they know what the problem is. And they usually think that is the problem. Our approach really is to finances never lie. So we go straight for the finances, and we try and help unpack the story of what's going on. And companies can get quite defensive because sometimes what the finances show and what they thought was the problem are sometimes not speaking to each other. But in terms of how we do strategy, especially when we facilitate strategy, it's very simple. We don't get into theories and models. What business are you in? What are you good at? If tomorrow you are not here, what will we miss about you? We get to very simple questions. And our strategic work is tailor-made for every client. So it's interesting. I got a call last week from a client saying, I've never seen anybody follow that framework. Can you give me a copy? I said, you are aware that's my intellectual property. No, I can't. Because with every client interaction, I will never know until I'm interacting in that business exactly what the client needs. Sometimes they think they need strategic intervention, meantime they need team building. They actually need to get their team together to be focusing on the right thing. Sometimes they think they need to look at, marketing or whatever. It's got nothing to do with marketing. There is something in your product that's not adequate, in your services that's not adequate. You can't sell something that is deficient. So really every intervention for us is different, but we get down to the basics. The business you're in, what makes you good? If tomorrow you are not here, what will we miss about you? And we have a whole range of other things that we go through. And some clients do feel sometimes, wow, that's too simplistic. But it's amazing how many of them actually cannot answer the very simple questions. That's what I want as a consumer ultimately. How are you meeting my needs? And sometimes what it needs is that you answer your very simple things that make you good. The one amazing human being that actually helped me in terms of how I craft my questions is Gareth Ackerman, who's the chairman of Pick n Pay. He also helped me as well when I was struggling with my thesis during the MBA, because I was like all over the place. And he just helped me calm down, focus. And I remember when I started Busara Leadership Partners, I asked for a session with him. And I was feeling a bit overwhelmed, saying, how am I going to make space for myself in a market that can be seen to be cluttered? But also, how do I stand out? And he says, Dudu, a lot of us in our businesses actually know what's going on. But sometimes when you ask certain questions and you ask the right questions, it makes us think about things differently. So if you become very good at the questions you ask, and you ask different questions, you may just find a niche for yourself. And I think that was the breakthrough thinking that I needed. And it really helped, because I find that in our strategic interventions, it's a lot about the questions that we're asking that make clients think differently. Because if you are in the business, immersed in the business, you're passionate, this is your business, there are things you actually become very blasé about. And somebody then just asks a question, you're like, oh, okay, I never thought of it that way. And if you have you thought of it in the context of your customer? Have you thought of it in the context of your supplier? Whatever your stakeholder model is. So strategy is actually not complicated. And I think a lot of us end up focusing on models. We love going internationally, and we go to business schools, and we import, and we just transplant. I've done an MBA. I loved my MBA. I know the theories and models. That's not what my client wants. They want to know, how can you help me in my business? And the confidence that I give them is that I've worked very hard on my skill set, on my ways of seeing. And part of why it's very important, especially the resources in our business, they have to be interdisciplinary. And what we mean by that is they need to have different types of qualifications so that they see things from a different perspective. So whether you're a scientist, you also have an MBA, you also have marketing, you have whatever. So when we look at a problem, we look at it from different perspectives. We call ourselves expert generalists. Because I think the 21st century, you can't be a rigid specialist, because then you see everything as a nail, so you just come as a hammer. So we look at things differently. So if I'm interacting with a client about something, I am seeing the ICT issues, I'm seeing the people issues, I'm seeing the process issues. It's holistic. And the very fact that one also has management experience, has board experience, now entrepreneurial experience. Whatever client I'm interacting with, I'm not interacting from theory, I'm interacting from practice. Because most times clients will come back and be defensive. And you say, no, have you thought about it this way? And the way you pose your questions and the things that you're asking makes them very aware that, no, she understands what she's talking about. I cannot, can you use the word bull around this one? And they respect that. I want to share with you 2 scenarios. The first scenario, leadership team, they first thought they need strategy review because they said, we have the strategy in place. Can you help us see how far we've come? Are we doing well? And when I interacted with the leadership team, I realized it's got nothing to do with the strategy. It's got to do with the respect that they have for each other and working together as a team. So that session turned into a team building. But team building in the context of the most important thing to me is you cannot be a leader of anybody if you can't lead yourself. So the focus was on putting a mirror up in front of all of them so that they can see themselves and say, if you want your people to do that, and yet in the session that we're having, this is what you're doing, are you then surprised that things are not happening in the organization? Because you yourself as a leader in this context are acting exactly the way your employees act. So they were a bit shocked at that because they're like, wow, people observe, staff observe what you do as leaders. You can have performance management, you can have other things in place, but they can see when you sabotage your own strategy. So that was an interesting context where they then said, can you then work with our staff? We are called Busara Leadership Partners for a reason, because we work with the leadership level. So we have never really worked much with the staff level. But we thought this is an interesting proposition. So we worked with the staff. And the staff came back. In fact, the leader of the organization came for a session because I always think it's important that they also part of it. And they said, this has been the most amazing session. The feedback, however, was that the sadness is we're going to go back into the workplace and nothing will change. And that's the problem in most organizations. Why strategy is not executed is we do these amazing sessions. We have all these targets and goals. But when we go back into the workplace, we don't do what we said we're going to do. We get caught up in politics, we get caught up in egos and other things. We get distracted. What strategy is not what's in the document. Strategy is the day-to-day activities. So if day-to-day you are not doing what's leading you to the vision, you're not actually executing strategy. That is one scenario. The second scenario is amazing client. Sometimes you facilitate sessions and everybody repeats the same thing and you're really trying to get to something and you're like, I know I may not be an expert in your business, but what you're giving me is not really going to help you. And one of the simple things I ask them is, who are your target market? When they first, because it can sound derogatory, leaders of an organization, we know our target market. But we interrogated that so much that somebody actually used a word that has never been used before. And yet it's something that they use outside of a strategy session. That was the key. It actually unlocked a market that was dormant within their market, where cash, literally, the minute they unlocked that key, cash was in the bank. The leader of this organization called. She said, I'm shocked. We had this session with you about 3 weeks ago. We did this, which is something that has been on our to-do list for 5 years. Money has been coming into the account. First, we thought somebody was depositing money erroneously. I'm shocked. The difference between a facilitator and a strategist is that we're not just facilitating conversation, we're looking at the quality of thinking. Those scenarios point to, if you have a person that thinks a particular way, they're able to pull certain things and identify certain things and say, this is the gem. To be a leader in South Africa, you need to be very passionate about this country. There's just no shortcut around it. You have to expect the best of this country, regardless of what's happening at the moment. Because political leaders come and go, but as citizens, we're here for a long time. And that's what we need to focus on. And it is very difficult when somebody has to invest their money and they don't know what's going to happen. It's very difficult. So it's also very difficult for somebody like me to tell someone to be patriotic regardless of what's happening. But I come from a family that's very optimistic. Even in the deep, dark times of apartheid, we always knew we'll have a new South Africa. Without any doubt, whatever happens December 2017 in this country, we will come out of it. The focus we need to be putting as every leader is on the skill set of our people. It's not enough to invest in education. We need to focus on STEM education: science, technology, engineering, and maths. If nothing else, all our energies must be to sponsor students, to sponsor all-night classes if we need be. We're just not doing enough. We're all saying we have a misalignment of skills. We do have a misalignment of skills. What are we doing about it? Our formal education is not going to help us. We as business leaders need these people as resources in our businesses. We need to do things differently. Let's focus on what we can do as leaders. Let's not focus on everything else that's going wrong. Yesterday I was having a session with young adults, 15-year-olds, young adults. Their focus is, how can we make things better? How can we work with other youth to make Africa better? It's the best thing we can do. We can spend all our energies on politicians and what they're doing wrong. The only thing we have control over is what we can do for our country. So let's be more creative, more innovative. I don't think we have been. Sometimes we find these projects and we give money here and there, but we actually don't see the impact of what we're doing. Let's start measuring. As much as we measure what's happening in our businesses, these efforts that we are making in terms of creating the skill set that we need, let's start measuring that. 23 years on, it's unacceptable that we do not have the skill set. This is the only way South Africa is going to compete on this continent. We are too few in terms of population numbers. We have high unemployment. Our edge is going to come from businesses that are driven by technology, by engineering, science. There's a reason countries like Belgium do well. They do not have mines. They don't have huge populations, but they're doing a lot of added value in terms of whatever products and exporting. This is the area we need to be in. And we're not doing enough of that. So my message to leaders in South Africa is, please love this country strong enough to look beyond what is happening politically and have hope that our people will make this country good.